Hello and welcome to the Jungle, a Cincinnati Bengals podcast brought to you by the Riverfront and the wonderful folks over at Blue Wire. My name is Owen Timmerding, joined alongside again the wonderful Caroline Palmer. Caroline, NFL free agency is heating up. Yesterday was the first day that teams could legal tampering, getting stuff going, getting some deals on the table before stuff is official. And goodness gracious, we'll get into that. But the weekend was really impactful on the Bengals, especially with these extensions they want to talk about. The three biggest things that happened this weekend, and there's a whole slew of free agency signings that have also impacted this as well. But the three biggest things that happened this weekend: Max Crosby signs a giant deal to stay with the Raiders. Myles Garrett becomes the highest paid non-QB in NFL history, and DK Metcalf gets traded to the in-division Pittsburgh Steelers and immediately signs a giant extension. Now, how does this impact the Bengals, you might ask? Well, pretty directly.
Yeah, I mean, let's start off with Crosby and Garrett because they go to Trey Hendrickson, which we just recently talked about. To me, this kind of goes in all signs going to Hendrickson being on the way out.
Mhm.
Especially from an agent's perspective. Like, obviously, I think Hendrickson has a lot of loyalty to Cincinnati, but from the other side of it, his agent is definitely going to go see if he can get money. I mean, it's showing that market value for good players at the defensive end position is a little bit higher than it has been in years past. And we've talked about how Hendrickson has been a phenomenal player for the better of the last 5 seasons. I don't think he's going to get 160 million like Miles Garrett did,
No.
but he definitely could get more money than he probably would either if he were to do it last year or if he were to for some reason stay and go next year. But that's definitely the biggest impact. I think it's more likely than not that Hendrickson's out the door at this point.
Yeah, and we'll get to these other two moves in a second, but a fourth kind of underrated move that is kind of connected to the Hendrickson saga is that the Washington Commanders were a very high team. They had a lot of draft capital, and they're kind of in this win now mode. They just traded for Laramie Tunsil yesterday, and what a lot of people in on the Bengals media landscape thought could have been picks they could have used for Trey Hendrickson. So I don't know about you, Caroline, but I think that kind of takes them out of the running. And honestly, I think the longer this Hendrickson kind of drama rolls out, the more likely he stays.
Yeah, I think it's like this. I would say probably the next 48 to 72 hours is really
Yeah.
crucial for him. I think that we've seen a couple of defensive guys go, but it's been more likely like linebackers and DBs who have gone
Mhm.
off the board, which is usually how it goes at this point in free agency, especially with the free agency this year being like not as hyped, especially compared to last year. But I've seen that it's not like an as hyped free agency as years past. So I do think it is crunch time. I mean, if they are going to go, I mean, the market is quite high. I think we talked about earlier about going to seek value. I think it's higher. He's not going to get the money he may have initially wanted, but if he can find a team that can pay him, I think the next 48 hours are really crucial if he wants money, or else he might have to settle for like a reconstruction or lower money to stay with the Bengals, which obviously Bengals
Yeah.
fans want. But if you're Hendrickson and you want money and you have to settle, that could just lead to like just an unsettling person in the locker room, which is not great to have.
And the frustrating thing about this, I don't know if frustrating is the right word, but some reports came out that the Bengals laid a 30 to $32 million offer on the table for Hendrickson. And he, I guess, did not like that. I just don't understand what his thought process is with that. I know he's trying to cash in on this great seasons he's had and parlay these two incredible sack leading years, but like we talked about this on our last podcast, I mean, he's 31, Caroline. You just cannot
Yeah.
command that kind of money to someone, especially at a position that plays at such a fragile rate.
No, I mean, and you see that across all ages. One that kind of reminded me of this a little bit was Chase Young. He's been in
Mhm.
free agency for the past couple of seasons. I think he just signed a deal with the Saints, but he had like a big, big rookie deal and then just kind of fell off the face of the planet in terms of production
Yeah.
statistics and everything. And he was a lot younger than Hendrickson is. And the Commanders did put a lot into him that first year. So I do think teams will be hesitant because he has reached the age where teams start to get a little bit nervous, which again, it kind of throws question marks as to why he didn't take the Bengals deal because it's like $32 million is still a lot of money. Like
Yeah.
it's more than enough for him to go, and it would still put him in one of the higher paid people at his position. Granted, it's not
Absolutely.
like earth shattering money, but it's really question marks to does he wanna stay in Cincinnati or does he wanna be elsewhere? Like, it really does
Yeah.
still banners in the air.
I also just kind of think we would have heard a little bit more of if Hendrickson is actively seeking his value. Like the Stafford stuff kind of which happened a week and a half ago, where he got to seek out his value, happened pretty quick. It was in like a couple days that this happened, and we're getting on almost a week of Trey Hendrickson able to get this checking out his value. So I think it's interesting that it's just such interesting thought experiment because yes, Hendrickson deserves a new deal in some shape or form because he's been so incredible. But and we'll move through this pretty quick because we have a whole pod that we talked about this last time. But it's just the age factor, and I hate saying this, but it's more likely than not that his production will decline.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think he has, like, I mean, again, just to recap, limited window for him to try to find this deal. If not, he's probably just gonna have to settle for some type of reconstructed or lesser deal just because he probably wasted his opportunity already. Just because we know in NFL free agency, most of these big name guys happen actually just before the window and they just
Yeah.
make it official when free agency opens. So there's a large chance that Henderson has just potentially missed the window or the agent held out for too long. So which would be really unfortunate for a player of his caliber.
So let's move on to these next two big deals that happened over the weekend. And this one that I'm going to bring up next, I think impacts the Bengals most directly. Here's the other thing. Both of them happened in division, which obviously is unfavorable for Cincinnati. And the other one is Myles Garrett becoming the highest paid non QB in the NFL. The Bengals are on record saying that they plan to make Jamar Chase the highest paid non quarterback in NFL history. We thought 40 was going to be around that number. That's now been shot because Myles Garrett has that. Now we're looking
Yeah.
at close to 42, 43, 44 for Jamar Chase. Caroline, I mean, like, that's super frustrating and for the Bengals front office that you couldn't get this taken care of.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He, like, kinda did this whole thing last offseason where he was like, "I want the money or I'm not playing," and then ended up playing anyway, and now you're stuck in a situation with, 1, you're gonna have to pay Jamar Chase more money if you're still going to live on that progress, or you're gonna have to let him walk, which nobody wants him to walk at all,
No.
and then secondly, I know you were gonna bring this up, but it kinda ties into my point. The second deal, which involves the Bengals' second receiver that's kind of out there, is this DK Metcalf deal and how that impacts how they operate with T. Higgins. Because you are going to pay Jamar Chase this huge amount of money, and now you have a team like the Steelers that has two wide receiver one caliber receivers, in my opinion, on their team, and Pickens and Metcalf now. What are you going to do about T. Higgins? Because you do need two wide receiver one caliber esque players to be able to compete with that, especially because the way their offseason has been going so far with who they've been re signing, they've been looking to go more pass heavy than run heavy for
Yeah.
sure.
It's the DK deal kind of confuses me. I've never been a big DK Metcalf guy. I think he's fine. I think him and Pickens will be whatever.
Yeah.
And just because Pittsburgh, I don't really know what if they think they know what they're doing at quarterback, but
No.
it just really impacts the Bengals because a year ago, I'm sure everyone's seen this tweet by now of the Bengals could have had all these guys at almost $10 million less than what they actually would be making right now. It's the Higgins is now going to command $33 million, just like DK Metcalf, because
Hmm.
he probably is better than DK Metcalf. He's
Oh, yeah,
younger
for sure.
and he is, I just think he's a better, well rounded receiver.
Hmm.
And so the Bengals just keep continuing to put themselves behind this eight ball with the with waiting on these things to happen. And it's just incredibly frustrating that we're kind of at this spot right now.
Yeah, we talked about it before, and I know it's been mentioned a lot on the pod about how the Bengals organization kind of their philosophy is just wait and see, and everybody's going to come crawling back. And we've hit a point in the NFL now with this increased salary cap and demands for players getting higher, where players aren't coming crawling back. Loyalty is kind of going out
Yeah.
the window in the modern day NFL. We're seeing a lot of players even just go divisionally just based on money, which is unfortunate for the whole scope of the game. But like that's not what today's podcast is about. But you're just seeing money really influence these players. And I agree with you. Absolutely. I think T. Higgins is a much better receiver than DK Metcalf is. DK Metcalf just is a lot bigger. So
Yeah,
that's really all DK Metcalf has, which I think Pittsburgh's also leaning to be a little bit more pass heavy, which will directly coincide with the way that the Bengals play and also into more of like what they should do on defense, which we'll get to later. But I do think they need to figure this out because right now it looks like they're trying to pick one or the other, which I don't think they could do because I think they could comfortably find a way to keep both. They just need to act fast before, particularly somebody just takes Higgins off that franchise tag deal because it would be easier to get a hold of him right now.
totally. And it's just like the longer you wait, the higher the price goes up. So
Yeah.
talked about the Bengals front office and how they operate. Let's segue in to NFL free agency here, where we've seen a masterclass in Bengals front office operation. Hand up, I think some of the moves they've made have been quite beneficial. We'll go kind
Hmm.
of down the line on which ones we think are good or bad. But I've been actually kind of impressed on how they've been able to kind of configure this defense so
Yeah.
far.
Oh,
But
yeah.
there's definitely some question marks on some of these
Mhm.
offensive signings. But since this has been kind of a little Debbie Downer so far to start, let's start with some
Yeah.
of these great defensive signings. And if you want to kick us off, I mean, we have a former Philadelphia Eagle that the Bengals just signed, and you said you're very high on him.
Absolutely. They just signed linebacker Oren Burks from the Philadelphia Eagles on a 2-year deal. I think this was a steal from them. For people who don't have a background on Burks, he is a linebacker was drafted by Philly, I think, and has stayed there, has been a backup for most of his career at Philadelphia. But with Nakobe Dean going down during the playoffs this year, Burks rolled right into that role and led in tackles, I think, in the NFC Championship game. He was a great fit. He's a really agile, can be used as a spy next to Zach Bond. Zach
Mhm.
Bond spoke really highly on him, and we all know that Zach Bond is this great, intelligent, football-minded player. But I do think they got him for a really cheap price.
I was just
I
gonna
do
say that.
like, I think this genuinely could be huge for them. They need somebody in the middle of that defense to kind of be an anchor, and I definitely think that Burks not only has the, like, athletic talent, but I also think he has the personality traits to really be someone to step up on a Bengals team that needs some guys to step up.
Yeah, so I really was impressed by this signing. I didn't really know a lot about him until I saw that the Bengals picked him up. I read up on him. He just seems like a machine. And the Bengals, their biggest weakness, I mean, Jermaine Pratt still led the team in tackles last year, but he was always kind of viewed as a weak link on this
Mhm.
defensive side of the ball. And hey, if the Bengals are going to go ahead and sign guys that are just ball hawks and are not going to back down and can pick right in and slide right in. And I mean, he's proven himself, I guess, to be ready for that NFL starter level role. So I'm going to go kind of push forward to one of my favorite signings the Bengals did. That's getting TJ Slayton from Green Bay. And like
Absolutely.
we said, the Bengals really lacked a really big defensive tackle last season that could stop the run. The Bengals got ran over all day last year. And
Mhm.
Slayton didn't have a best season last year. Production levels were down, but his first couple years were great. And not a big sack guy, but he's so good at stopping the run, Caroline.
Mhm. I agree. I mean, 2024 was not Slayton's best season. I was doing some research myself, but his 2022 and 2023 production levels were quite high for
Yeah.
somebody of his size in that particular position. And I think the Bengals just need consistency right now. Like they obviously had a little bit of a defensive like rise near the end of the year, which we can spin into BJ Hill in a little bit. But I do think that they just need some guys who are going to consistently get to the ball. And Slayton and Burks are two big ads for them
Yeah.
there. Plus, with people that they can get from the draft, which we obviously know that's a big talking point for them.
And I think you can kind of see in these first two signings as well the defense philosophy that Al Golden is going to bring to Cincinnati. These are very different kind of guys than that would fit this Lou Anarumo sub safety zone style defense. These guys are going to get to the ball and get stops, and that's kind of what the Bengals lacked with last year. And you can kind of see the vision so far.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, and we'll talk about the rest of the Bengals ones first, but we talked about it before the pod that there's a couple guys still out there that I think would be really good to fit that philosophy
Oh
as
yeah.
well, but that's further down the road, but there's still a couple of re-signings and signings that we could talk about that I think have been pretty good for them.
Yes. So I'm gonna go ahead and count Samaje Perine as a re-signing because he's
Oh,
been a
yeah, I
Bengal.
agree, I
He's
agree.
yes, so
He was
he's
gone
not
for a season.
not been with the Bengals for a couple years, but he was really a fan favorite and Burrow loved him. He was
Mhm.
trusted. Was trusted in Kansas City last year. Didn't play a lot, he had that AFC Championship game kind of clinching play. He was kind of Mr. Clutch for Cincinnati too. He's a great third down back. And I kind of think it'll balance out the speed and quickness of Chase Brown.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big things that I noticed when he played at Cincinnati before was just kind of his consistency and is able to
Hmm.
just take some pressure off of Joe Mixon at the time. But I think this will be really important for Chase Brown because he was really just like the only source of run game the Bengals had last year. And they don't have the funds, particularly with their receiver issues, to go and get two solid running backs like you see, like, for example, Detroit with Jameer Gibbs
Yeah,
and David Montgomery. But I think he's a really good running back 2 option where you can just kind of take the load off of Brown for a little bit and maybe not run him into the ground, which the Bengals definitely don't need. So I think this is a great re-sign from them. I think it's a great pick.
I really like it. I mean, everyone kind of liked him. Obviously, he's probably lost a step in the last couple of years, but he's definitely something they've want. And stuff I've read is that since they kind of let him go a couple of years ago to Denver, they've been trying to get him back for 2 years again. He got cut last season. Bengals seemed to be kind of in the mix to sign him. Ended up going to Kansas City, but they get him back now. So we'll kind of gloss over Carolina minus long snapper consistency. I'm fine keeping him. All good. 1 year deal. Tanner
Yeah.
Hudson, and then let's get into these the two tight ends. Tanner Hudson been kind of a
Yeah.
Bengals staple the last year. Burrow seems to like him sort of. He kind of gets mixed in a lot, but the big one here is, and you said overpay of
Yeah.
Mike Gesicki.
Yeah. This one kinda I had some question marks about this one. I think Mike Gesicki, I mean, with his time in the Bengals and with his time in the Dolphins, he was consistent. I just don't know if he's worth 25 mil.
Yeah,
Like, it does definitely, like I've talked about multiple times on this podcast, that the Bengals are going more for a pass heavier offense, which is fine. Burrow is a fantastic thrower of the football, as we saw last year. But I don't know if Gesicki was worth 25, almost $26 million over the course of 3 years. He's also aging on the aging side of the
yeah,
tight end, and he's not like Travis Kelce, George Kittle-esque, which those are the 2 that I would say deserve that kind of money, if not more. But I mean, he's a good pick to stay around. I mean, he's a solid veteran, can help out some of the younger guys, even in the receiving core, because we see a lot of tight end plays now on the receiving side across the league. So I just think they could have maybe repurposed that money for a little bit less somewhere else. But props to
yeah.
Gesicki's agent because they got him some money.
I understand everything you're saying. I'm going to take a little spin on this because the last few years the Bengals have not had any consistency at tight end, and I think they were willing to sign a guy long term that they think they trust.
Mhm,
So that's kind of my thought process because they've done these 1 year rentals ever since the Super Bowl year. CG Uzama was around forever, but then it went Hayden Hurts, the Irv Smith experiment, and then Mike Gesicki. And Gesicki's probably turned out to be the best, obviously, of all of them
mhm.
because he's the only one that sits assigned a second contract with Cincinnati. I understand everything you're saying. I think he's been around forever. He's aging, definitely probably a little more uh, good agent work, I would say.
Mhm.
But I think the Bengals were looking for just that consistency factor that they haven't had at the position the last few years, especially if they're trying to keep this offensive core all on the same page.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I mean, we talked about I mean, the Bengals are definitely trying to fix their offense first, and consistency's fine. I just think the dollar amount was a little high.
I agree. All right, so let's go. We'll do Joseph Osai. Go really quick. Bengals
Yeah.
drafted him a few years ago. He his was hurt the 1 year, and he's kind of been on a slow up since
Mhm.
then. I don't think he's been exactly what the Bengals have wanted, and that's why they gave him this kind of 1 year prove it deal.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think it was a prove it deal, and also they couldn't really afford to lose anyone else
Mhm.
in that particular area of the football field. But I mean, obviously, he's been slowly rising up and potential 1 year prove it deals. We've seen that work all the time with
Yeah.
a lot of different players on both sides of the football. So I think this is a great opportunity for him, especially if Hendrickson does go. It gives him a great opportunity to slide into more of a regular role because you're going to be missing 2 big guys that usually fill those spots.
Awesome. So the Bengals also today signed corner special teams guy Marco Wilson. And then, but let's get to these next two, which I think kind of show what the Bengals might do in the draft a little bit.
Mhm.
And or one is a head scratcher that people think might rubbed Trey Hendrickson the wrong way. And that first one is BJ Hill, 3 years, 33 million, a staple of the Bengals. In my opinion, one of the best trades in Bengals history because he's been pretty
Mhm.
productive. And they
Yeah.
traded Billy Price, who ended was a bust to the Giants, and they kind of just swapped bad players. And BJ Hill's been great. Fans love him, team love him. Um, Key veteran member, like you said, I like it. I like BJ Hill, and I'm happy to have him around. But as a non-Bengals fan, what are your thoughts here?
I liked this one. When I wrote it down in my notes, I said this was my favorite re-signing that they had. I
Nice.
didn't count T. Higgins in the re-signing. I mentioned earlier the Bengals had a pretty bad defense, but they kind of turned it around slightly at the end of the year to make them competitive. And I think BJ Hill was like an underlying important factor in that. He is somebody that I think fits the defensive philosophy that they've gone for in
I
free
agree.
agency. That's a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more get after the ball. He definitely is in that persona, which we talked about, definitely shows the direction in which they want to take this defense going forward, which I think is a great direction for them. It'll be a total contrast. And he's been very consistent on the production side, which we just talked about with Gasecki is really important right now to the Bengals organization. So I agree. I think this is a good one. It was my personal favorite of their re-signings.
All right. So then this final one of this re-signing bunch is Cody Ford, who who's had an interesting career with the Bengals. A couple years ago, if you would have told me they re-signed Cody Ford, I would have not been very happy because he was kind of a revolving door. I think they kind of had him playing on the end. So, but I think we might have figured out that he was kind of out of position the whole time because he got
Yeah.
slided into those guard spots and really had a great end of the season.
hmm Yeah. I was just going to say, I think he kind of just drew the short end of the stick where he was the most like, I guess, like, adaptable guy on the line and was, like,
Yeah,
kind of like how Joe Tooney was for a while, where he could just play anywhere on the line. Granted, there was places where it wasn't as good, but he's very flexible, so, obviously, injury crisis strikes all the time, you don't want it to happen, but he was somebody there, but I can understand the mixed feelings about this
yeah.
signing, but again, on 2 years, again, it's kind of one of those, like, tiny like, you got 2 years to prove yourself, and I wouldn't be surprised if they go O-line, especially with their, like, 4th or 5th in the draft this year, and maybe put a little bit of pressure on him during the offseason to prove that he still deserves a space.
I agree, and I think that's a good segue because as I'm a decent fan of the Cody Ford signing, but by no means is that the guard replacement or for the future of Cincinnati.
Mm-mm.
So let's kind of translate and go forward into some of this availability on the guard side and what the Bengals need. And you have some user fan mail.
Yes, we do. We did get a user fan mail, and the question was, outside of the extension, what moves do you want to see the Bengals make? Who do you want to see them bring in to fix the O-line holes and the holes on the defensive side of the ball?
All right, so let's start with that offensive line. And I know you got a couple names that you have written down. I have some different ones actually. So why don't
Mhm.
you go ahead and start?
Yeah, so the first one that I started with is Mekhi Becton from the Eagles, and I think this would be awesome. We talked about this before we went on the pod that it might be a little money heavy, but the Eagles have actually just signed a contingency plan for Mekhi Becton at guard. He was fantastic for the Eagles. He was great helping them with their run play and just overall pass blocking. That whole line was fantastic, and he's been having some issues with negotiations over his contract, and then they recently, I think just yesterday, signed this complacency guy. So I know his agent or there's been in the NFL rumor mill that he might be looking for a way out. And I think this would be a great pickup for them because he's a solid guy, good veteran. And if they bring some guys in, I think he could be a great mentor because he was at the Jets too, even though he was quite young
Yeah.
while he was there.
Awesome. So I've kind of talked myself into the Bengals going after Tevin Jenkins, the Bears offensive lineman.
Okay.
He was good last season when he played, and that's the big question mark that they had. And I talked about this on the last one, and I think this would be a good pick because the Bengals almost took him in the 2021 draft. And instead,
Yes.
they took Jackson Carman, and he's been a total disaster.
hmm
And to some extent, Tevin Jenkins has not been exactly what the Bears wanted, but I think he might be worth the pickup. I really like 15th in pass blocking, 17th overall last season. I'm just worried, like we talk ad nauseum about these injuries. I just think it's worth it. I think the Bengals obviously liked him then, and I think they kind of feel the same way now.
Yeah, I agree, and another one online, I really, really liked Drew Dahlman. Obviously, he went
Mhm,
to Chicago. I thought that would have been a great pickup for Cincinnati. Obviously, he's not on the board. So the other one that I had was Brandon Schreff from
mhm.
Jacksonville. He's just somebody that I think is because obviously we talked about Cody Ford's not a long-term answer. Schreff is just kind of like a solidified starter who can do
Yep.
the job, and we talk a lot about mentorship with the league. It's been something that we saw with Jason Kelsey and Cam Jurgens, like how that can work correctly and turn into something that can be successful for an organization, and I think he's been I looked at his stats, very, like, relatively consistent dude, which again, consistency seems to be the common denominator for the Bengals organization, and it would also give them some room to draft a rookie to make sure they could get some long term at guard.
Yeah, I agree. Another name I had was Zeitler, Kevin Zeitler, and they're kind of
Yeah.
similar in the fact that it's like they're just older guys, veteran guys that was played for Cincinnati before. I wouldn't be surprised if the Bengals do go get one of the vet guards that we just
Mhm.
laid out because and we'll go into the draft a little bit. They have I think some of the moves they've made have kind of the Bengals have kind of played their hand, like tipped their hand a little bit in what their draft process is going to be.
Yeah.
I think based on what I saw yesterday, round 1 will definitely be defense, and I think they're gonna go definitely offensive line in round 2. So,
Yes.
especially at that guard. But I'm looking at the notes you sent me here. There's a thing that I like that you have written down, and it's the Bengals potentially going after Willie Gay, the
Yes.
Chiefs linebacker. I haven't thought about that. I wanna hear your thought process because I was really intrigued on why you put that him.
Yeah. I was looking and I was like, they need some people at linebacker. Obviously, they have Burks now, but he's relatively new to
Yeah.
specifically being a starter. I first watched Willie Gay when he played on the Chiefs a while ago, back 2020, 2021. And one of the main things that I really liked about him, and I'm a huge personality person as an athlete myself, I think sometimes like just the persona that you can bring, like leadership qualities, is just as important as your athletic ability. And that is exactly what Willie Gay brings to the table. And he had 4 amazing seasons for the Chiefs. And
Mhm.
he's an athletic veteran. He was a former running back in high school, and he's a very fast guy, still very nimble. And again, I think he's a fantastic veteran option that you can use in the middle of the field to kind of be an anchor because
Yeah.
I do think the Bengals do need an anchor, especially in the middle of the field, because we talked about how those first and second lines have really struggled. So it was something that like caught my attention. I honestly totally forgot he was in free agency and it came up
Yeah.
on like, social media, and I was like, "Wow, like, I think this would be a great fit." Like, I think this would be a good steal for them both on the field and off.
Yeah. I think it's been a great conversation. I think we've had a lot of great things to say. I've been pleasantly surprised with how the Bengals attacked free agency. I think it's funny that all the deals are kind of similar, these 1, 2 year under
Yeah.
$10 million deals.
Mhm.
It's very Bengals. So none of this is as a surprise to me, but I've just been impressed.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, because we know they have a tendency to wait, so the fact that they kind of were a little bit active on the first day was a pleasant surprise, I will say so
Yeah.
myself, and obviously they were able to keep a couple guys, and as of right now, Hendrickson and Higgins are both still on the roster, so
Yeah,
can't really be too upset about that yet.
exactly. And so obviously, I think we're close on these
Mhm.
Jamar Chase deals. Obviously, Jamar Chase can wait a little bit, but I think sooner rather than later, we're going to get this stuff done. And obviously, Bengals fans will bring that news to you as soon as we know with any sort of information and banter that we got. So, Caroline, I'm good if you're good.
Yeah, I'm good. I think this has been a great convo,
Yeah,
but I'm sure we're gonna have another emergency pod in a couple days. So,
absolutely. Absolutely. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. This has been Welcome to the Jungle, Cincinnati Bengals podcast from Owen Timberding and Caroline Palmer. We thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
yeah, see ya.